Zach, it is great to be back for another episode of United Debates of America. We obviously had a really good debate and heard some good feedback from folks, not just the people we agreed with, but people we disagreed with, and that's what makes this better. And it's been a hectic week for both of us. You've been following from afar in the cold of Atlanta what President Trump's first couple of days have looked like. And I've actually been fortunate enough to be here in DC and to attend a number of the inaugural events and see up close what the new administration has looked like. But we had a great conversation today with Congressman Khanna of California's 17th congressional district. As you pointed out, he came to Congress at the same time that Donald Trump came to the White House, and he's been one of the few Democrats, I got to say myself, maybe you disagree, who has, I believe, been well-intentioned in working with President Trump and Republicans. In fact, he pointed out that Donald Trump signed 5 of his own bills into law. He has been a big advocate for DOGE and breaking up the cost structure around defense, which is fast approaching $1 trillion. And so it's a good conversation for us to have with Khanna. Thoughts, Zach?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, Roe is a unique guy in the sense of there's a lot of congresspeople who would not take some of the tax he takes. I agree with you 100%. He will work with the Trump administration when he believes that there's good faith, common ground between the two sides, and he'll push back against it when he doesn't. But I think a lot of Democrats, unfortunately, dig their heels in and refuse to work with the Trump administration when there is progress to be made strictly because it's the Trump administration. So Roe is not one of those Congress people. And just from personal experience, which we hear in the interview, he's also someone who tries to connect with the people he's trying to help. He's actually, I've met him prior to this because he's brought me into conversations as a TikTok creator into, what's been going on with the ban and trying to understand the perspective from people who are directly involved by it. So, Roe is a great guy. And I think you're right. He is one of the few very well-intentioned folks on the left that are willing to work with, a new Trump administration that's going to be different from the first time around. But I do think there's a willingness there for sure.
Which is to say, in very short sense, he does not suffer from TDS. He does not suffer from Trump derangement. No, but seriously, I mean, he doesn't suffer from this knee-jerk, well, since Donald Trump supports it, even if I might have supported it 2 days ago, I can't touch Donald Trump because he's Donald Trump. But it was a good conversation nonetheless, and looking forward to everyone's feedback on it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Trump, I do want to touch on the Trump derangement syndrome really quickly because I don't necessarily think that that's an accurate way to describe what the left does. I mean, there are definitely people in the left who do that, but I think the majority of that you're feeling is because they just wholeheartedly disagree with what he's trying to do. There are definitely spaces of overlap between Trump and Democrats, I think, especially, honestly, I think more in this new term than the previous one. I think that Trump has become a bit more brazen with what he's willing to go for and go again. I mean, for example, TikTok is a great example because the right largely was very against a TikTok, against TikTok being live, and they're very much for a ban. And Trump kind of said, "I don't care," and just did it his own way. So I think there might be more opportunity for Democrats to sort of get out of their own way with this one.
That's right. That's
right.
Yeah.
So we get into that with Roe, and let's jump into the conversation. We'll see how it all went. Thanks for joining us, Roe. We really appreciate you being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. You actually have the distinct honor of being our first guest ever, so it should be fun.
Well, I'm honored. I'm honored.
Usually we use our platform to sort of have a civil debate between the left and the right, and because that's definitely a shortage of that going on this day and age. So we're, that's what we usually do, but happy to have you here. There's a lot to talk about, but it's going to be a great conversation. Have you met James before?
I don't think we met in person, but I appreciate what you're doing with the podcast and trying to promote civility and respect for people with different viewpoints.
Awesome.
Well, I appreciate it, Congressman. And you were kind enough to share an article I wrote in the Free Press back in 2023 about how high school debate had become too sheltered. There was viewpoint discrimination, specifically conservative viewpoints.
I remember that. That was a good piece.
Thank you very much. And so in that spirit, I started an organization called Incubate Debate, a nonprofit debate league that's viewpoint diverse, and then honored to work with my friend here, Zach, to show America what civil debate can look like. And we're working hard to do that. So thank you for all the
Fantastic. It's one of the most important things we need in this country right now.
Absolutely. There's no question. And really quickly, I also just want to thank you for everything you've done on TikTok so far. And for everybody out there, Roe put together a great meeting for content creators to come together and talk about, what was going on with the TikTok ban and give us some insight into what's been happening behind the scenes, and also just sort of hear us out and let us speak our mind about what's been happening. So I really want to thank you for doing that. It's really rare that somebody in your position would actually spend the large amount of time you did doing that. So I really want to thank you for
Well,
that.
I want to thank you for coming to the Hill, for speaking out, and all the content creators on the platform. I mean, for many people, this is their livelihood. I talked to a mom. She was 4 young kids, single mom, making 60,000 off this app. Devastated if the app goes away.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the idea of speech and standing for speech that may conflict with what the Beltway discusses. So I had a petition that got over 1 million signatures in 48 hours. And that's the sentiment out there amongst the people.
I'm one of those signatures, so I'm glad we got there. That's great. I mean, I kind of want to start there, actually, because I know that you and Rand Paul have some legislation to repeal the ban now, as opposed to trying to negotiate a deal with a U.S. company. How's that been going? Has there been any kind of like consensus response to what you guys have been trying to do?
Well, look, more people now recognize we can't ban this app. I mean, they voted to ban the app, and then they told their campaigns, "Go get me as many followers on the app." So it was a bit of hypocrisy from the political class. Now, are there concerns to make sure that the data stays in the United States? Absolutely. Should we try whatever we can to have as much of the ownership interest be U.S. interest? Yes. Should we make it clear that there is zero tolerance for any Chinese Communist Party interference with algorithms? Absolutely. But we can do that without banning the app. And candidly, in this case, being in the spirit of bipartisanship, I give Trump credit to say that he's going to work to find a solution. And I'm going to be working with Rand Paul and him. I don't think our legislation is necessarily going to pass, but the fact that it could be a vehicle to get more congresspeople and senators talking about not shutting it down will be helpful.
Makes sense. I mean, it's definitely a complicated set of circumstances, and obviously people like myself who have a big following on TikTok want to see it end in a good place. But there's a different levels to it: national security, speech, and just I think there's economic levels to it as well. I mean, a lot of people rely on this as a vehicle to make their income. So, and small businesses especially, there's a ton of small businesses that were 90% making their money off of TikTok. So I think with Trump in this, at least giving the 75-day stay, I'm hopeful that there will be some sort of movement in the right direction. But, as we saw, it's unpredictable.
I'm hopeful too. I think there is going to be a resolution, but as you know, the app is still not up on Google's App
Yes.
Store or Apple's App Store. Both are in my district. I've reached out to them, and they at some point this app can go probably a month or two without any impact, but at some point that would have an impact. So hopefully the administration can work on a solution quickly. I believe they are. I believe that Mike Waltz, their national security advisor, wants to resolve this.
Great. That's good to hear. And, I think segueing off of that, I believe you came into Congress the same time when Trump was sworn in for his first term. Is that right?
I did.
Yeah.
My brother puts it back then. He put it the year anyone could get elected. Now I don't think he'd make the same jab because Trump has shown more political skill.
That's very true. So I'm curious, given that you came in at the same time and now Trump is back, how did you find working with his administration the first time around?
Well, I obviously he did certain things that were blatantly, in my view, unconstitutional, and that's why I voted to impeach him twice. But at the same time, he signed 5 of my bills into law, and where I worked with him and was on a good government for citizens, making our government services citizen friendly. We make our tech companies user friendly. Well, why can't we have citizen friendly government services so you don't feel intimidated when you have to go on a government website and see 50 hyperlinks, or when you're dealing with the DMV, but that you actually have a design that centers citizens. And I worked with a person, Matt Lira, in the White House, and he signed 5 of the bills and 2 or 3 of them in the Oval Office.
That's great. Do you expect a different experience this time around, given that his administration is likely to be a bit more MAGA, for say, to not mince words? I mean, he definitely restructured his approach to how he filled his administration. So do you have a different strategy on how to work with them this time around? Or are you going to try the same strategy as the previous administration?
Look, on areas where I think there could be common ground for the American public and more effective government, I'm going to try to see if there's any common ground. For example, in the Defense Department, Michael Bloomberg came out with a proposal saying 15% of our Defense Department should be for new emerging technology. Now, I am the ranking member on the Cyber Innovation Technology Committee on Armed Services. I think that's a great idea. Maybe Musk or others will recognize that, given he worked with Ash Carter to start SpaceX. So if there are ideas that are actually going to get us more value for our money or make reforms that are going to make government more effective, then I will work to find those solutions. Where I will oppose is on cuts with Department of Education, Social Security, Medicare, CFPB. I mean, and so we'll have to see what he proposes.
That makes sense. I'm sure, James, you have some intrigue on the Doge side of things. I'm sure you're a big supporter of that. So what do you think on that?
Well, Congressman, Vivek Ramaswamy is a friend and have worked with him closely on the Doge work. On December 5th, you said that you believed in Doge, that you wanted to work with Doge. From what you've seen so far, I mean, part of it goes down to the continuing resolution we saw in late December and the work that both Elon and Vivek had on that. But now this new refocused, narrowed focus on perhaps spending and not the regulation angle. How are you thinking about Doge today versus when you said on December 5th, I'm ready to work with Doge?
Well, look, I think that where Elon offers the greatest insight is on SpaceX. I mean, that is where he disrupted Lockheed and Boeing and ULA with a more innovative, cheaper technology to get satellites up into space. And what I'd like to see is him focus on the Pentagon budget that's approaching almost $1 trillion, where the five primes have cost plus contracting, meaning they can just spend and spend and spend, and there's no accountability, and bring more competition there, have more emerging technology there, have more accountability, and actually be bold and say, we don't need $1 trillion defense budget and we can still pay our troops more. We'll see if he's able to bring that kind of innovation to defense.
Excellent.
That makes sense. For me, coming from the left side of things, my concern with Doge, I actually support Doge myself in terms of its intent. I think it's a smart idea to have, when you have a government our size, and there's definitely inefficiencies, to try to maximize efficiency. My concern is having somebody like Elon Musk run it, just because, not because of Elon Musk's personality or any of the things that we can get into a debate about, but more so from a conflict of interest perspective. I mean, this guy is the richest guy in the world, and he's got businesses all over the place where he can stack the deck for himself if he wants to. Is that something that has concerned you personally on this, or am I in my own sphere on that one?
I agree. I think there should be financial disclosures, just like JD Vance has financial disclosures. Donald Trump has financial disclosures. I think Elon Musk should have to submit to the financial disclosures of congresspeople or people in high appointed office. And that is a legitimate concern. But in terms of, is he the person I would have appointed that role? No, I would have rather he be focused on how we build more manufacturing in the United States and not in some of the cuts, broad-based cuts. But President won. He gets to pick his team. And what I want to do is make sure that Democrats are seen as for effective government and a partner where that makes sense, and oppose him where it doesn't.
That makes sense. I mean, I think the infeasibility I see is more so in the number. I mean, I think he threw out $2 trillion at first in cuts, and now it's down to $1 trillion. But that also seems infeasible to me to a certain degree. Do you think that's a number we could even approach as a reasonable number, or do you think that it's probably going to be not achievable?
No way. No way. Unless he's talking about $2 trillion over 10 years,
right?
Which I don't think he was, because I think he was basically looking at how much the spending went up post-pandemic. And trying to get it to pre-pandemic levels. But the GDP has also grown post-pandemic. We had inflation post-pandemic. Right. It's still only about 22% of GDP, the federal spend. So unless he touches Social Security or Medicare, there is no way that he could get those numbers to work. And for everything the president says, he doesn't intend to cut those programs.
That makes sense. I mean, James, I'm curious from your side of things, is that what you hear, that's how the right's going to approach it? Or do you think that they actually might want to try and make these more severe cuts into Social Security and things like that?
Well, I think we should trust President Trump on this point about not cutting Social Security or Medicare. I think that The focus on spending, there's a lot more to be focused on with the regulatory aspect, the administrative aspect. Congressman, you'll know the tyranny of occupational licensing. 50 years ago, 1 in 20 workers were subject to them, and now 1 in 3 are. The idea that last year in Louisiana, if you wanted to sell flowers, combining the daisies and the tulips together, you'd have to get a license from the government to earn a living. And so, how do you think about DOGE expanding beyond the current focus on spending, which certainly will save the taxpayer? But how do we also give folks who are on the sidelines, who are long term unemployed, who want to pull themselves up by their bootstraps? How do we give them a real shot to make a living without having to get a government permission slip to do so?
Well, I agree that we have to have a more effective government. First, we need a fast pass for some national projects of importance so that you don't get caught up in long delays of bureaucracy and permitting. I mean, some of the things we passed, chips and science, infrastructure bill, the money still isn't out the door. We still don't have the factories in the ground. It's one of the reasons I think the president didn't get as much credit for those programs. Second, look, on service jobs, we want those jobs to be higher pay. I think it's fine to say we want to be providing people with apprenticeships, with credentialing, so that they can increase their professionalization and productivity. But at the same time, we don't want to license, Raj, as it was famous word about India's economy before it was liberalized. And you can say, let's focus on credentialing, but not have the government always require licensing that is making those jobs harder.
Understood.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to sort of shift gears real quick while we still have you. And I just want to get your perspective on two things really fast. One, I'll start with is, what do you think is the primary reason that Donald Trump is sitting in the Oval Office today and not Kamala Harris?
I think he spoke to the American spirit of unleashing the American spirit of ambition and expansion and excellence and merit, and portrayed our party unfairly but successfully as a party that managed decline, that we were a bunch of careerists and bureaucrats presiding over the slow decline of America. I think our party has to say, no, we're the party of innovation. We're the party of the future. We're the party of technology. I won the heart of Silicon Valley with 67% of the vote compared to 35%. But our task is that we believe in the potential of every American to contribute. And we don't want all the wealth just piling up and opportunities in my district. We want to create that kind of growth and dynamism and production in every part of this country. But, his message was really against a stagnancy than many Americans felt.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I think it brings up a good question of like, what do you think the future of the Democratic Party is? I agree with that messaging, but it's like I feel like we have this gap between what we actually are and what we're saying we are. It's a very difficult gap to jump over at this point. So I'm curious what your vision is for getting the Democrats to understand how to connect our message with people and make it feel legitimate and like something that they can believe in. What do you think we do here?
I think it's too simplistic to just say we need to be economic populists and pig villains. Right. I think what we have to say is for the past 50 years, the trajectory for too many Americans has been one of decline. They've seen their jobs shipped to China and Mexico. They've seen corporate executives make all these profits, and they're not getting ahead. They're not being able to buy a house. The American dream is out of reach. And the way to reignite the growth, the opportunity, the dynamism in places like Johnstown and Galesburg isn't simply tax cuts and deregulations, but it requires an investment with the private sector in building new industry, much the way Alexander Hamilton, Lincoln, FDR did, and that we need to give people healthcare and education to be able to contribute. But it can't just be that they feel they're getting a handout. It has to be that they have been shafted, and that our party is the one that's going to help them realize this excellence, this potential, their capability.
That makes sense.
Absolutely. Congressman, before you leave, I want to ask you just one thing, if I may. We think a lot about debate, and we talk about these words that incubate as make debate great again. You debated with Vivek Ramaswamy in New Hampshire. You're a big fan of open debate and free speech. If I can ask, what does make debate great again mean to you, Congressman?
One of the things I did high school debate that I never appreciated about that though I appreciated a lot of it, was that they tell you to speak fast to get everything in. And I always thought that was not the way actually Lincoln or Douglas would have spoken. And so I think getting people to think and practice how they actually would present in the real world especially in a soundbite culture where everything is too fast. Asking people to slow down may not be the worst thing. And then making sure that people are actually debating opposing points of view. I mean, I went to University of Chicago for college. I read Milton Friedman, I read Gary Becker, I read Robert Lucas, I read a lot of the conservative economists, and that doesn't make me a disciple of them, but it makes me understand their argument so that where I disagree, I can think about the best arguments that they have and try to offer a counter. And if we shelter people from the opposing perspective, they're not going to be sheltered when they run for Congress or run for president or are in a real job in trying to lead this country. So we're doing them a terrible disservice by sheltering them.
Congressman, thank you so much. Thank you for joining United Debates of America.
Thank you. Thank you for what you guys are doing.
Of course.
Appreciate
Thanks
it.
so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was our conversation with Congressman Ro Khanna from Silicon Valley, a very relevant time to be from that district. And, it's great to hear his perspective on all these different things. I think there's a lot of stuff that we touched on in there, but the primary thing I took away from that conversation was, like we said in the intro, a willingness to work with the Trump administration on a number of things. America's not going to come to a halt just because half the country, maybe even at the level of despises Donald Trump. We're still going to try to work together because in the end, this is all for the benefit of America continuing to grow. And we may have different visions of how that's going to happen. And Ro may have a different vision of how it's going to happen from James or even myself. But I think in the end, it was good to see that he has a clear vision forward of how this is going to be navigated. And, I think him becoming a bigger voice in the Democratic Party is a great thing for the Democratic Party.
I agree. His role in the Democratic Party, I think more than anything, will be to facilitate debate, to incubate debate that otherwise might not happen. And so that vision, that policy, that plan, when it's subject to rigorous open debate, rigorous accountability and scrutiny, it will end up better than if it was just siloed over here and a bunch of Democrats or a bunch of Republicans talking to one another. And so I think that's what Roe's legacy will be, is one who champions open debate, champions reaching across the aisle, not in a superficial sense, Zach, but in a way that says, look, we have something in common. Let's debate it out. Let's challenge one another. But let's remember that we are here to serve Americans from all walks of life. And I truly believe that Congressman Khanna is in D.C. to do just that.
I agree with you. And, honestly, what better first guest could there be than somebody who's actually in Congress and wants to facilitate the type of debate we're having here? So I was really happy to have him. And, look, we'll probably hopefully have him back someday in the future and see how things are going as we traverse the second Trump administration.
That's exactly right. And, we open it up with a conversation about the TikTok and obviously some of the high school debate stuff that I'd done in the past. But I want to read that tweet that he put out in May 2023 in response to my high school article in the Free Press, which is entitled "At High School Debates, Debate is No Longer Allowed." He says, quote, "What is sad is that the real world is messy and harsh. By sheltering students and censoring viewpoints, they are setting them up for failure to advance the very causes they care about. There are, alas, very few safe spaces in Congress or presidential races." And so the idea that a certain student would be told that a certain viewpoint isn't allowed or would automatically be disqualified, even a viewpoint that you may vehemently disagree with, Zach, I still think you'd be able to check your biases at the door and evaluate that agreement or that viewpoint on its own merit.
100%. You and I are very much aligned on that. I've always been the kind of person where when I hear anybody sort of being sheltered from a certain perspective, or we're trying to limit a conversation about something, it's always a mistake. Even if it's difficult to have a conversation about something, or it's triggering to have a conversation about something, makes people angry, that's a good thing in my mind. I think that the more we veer away from conflict, the more the conflict will bubble up underneath. And I think that is, honestly, we're seeing the result of that right now with where we stand in this country. And I very much support the opposite direction being the direction we go. And I think, what we're doing with this show is part of the solution. Is obviously not going to be the entire thing, but it's part of it. And, anybody out there who thinks we should keep conversations limited to what is comfortable and okay, it's not going to work out in the long run.
No.
People are going to get frustrated by that, and we're seeing it already.
Yeah, that we are. Well, we'll be back soon for a proper debate.
So much has happened in such a short period of time, so we'll do our best to consolidate the debate as much as we can, but I'm sure there'll be a lot to talk about.
Wonderful. Looking forward to it, Zach. Great to see you.
Good to see you too. Talk soon.